Introducing the remarkable archetype, the dangerous gentleman. With a demeanor that commands respect and a hint of potency, he embodies strength tempered by virtue. Though his capabilities could veer towards danger, he channels his power for noble causes, serving others and safeguarding those in need. Rooted in a profound love for both God and humanity, he navigates life with discipline and purpose. In his presence, one witnesses the harmonious blend of power and benevolence, a testament to the true essence of masculinity. Step into the world of the dangerous gentleman, where strength is wielded for righteousness, and discover a captivating embodiment of honor and valor. Greetings and welcome to Storytime with the Dangerous Gentleman. Yes, I am the Dangerous Gentleman. No, I did not give myself that nickname, but I certainly did earn it. One of the most common questions I get in practice from my patients is, where are you from? How long have you lived in Yakima? Things like that. For me, it's kind of difficult to define where I'm from because I'm kind of from all over, but each place that I've lived has contributed to who I am now. And so I just wanted to go into a brief history of all the places I've lived. It's kind of fun. And how that has contributed to my life now. So my brother and I were born in Eugene, Oregon. Actually, my parents lived in a little town outside of Eugene, Oregon called Dexter, where my dad was the doctor and my mom was a teacher in this intentional community called Shiloh House. And what Shiloh House was, it was a branch of the Calvary Chapel, and it was a ministry for street people. So what would happen is these hippies and ex-drug users would convert to Christianity, and they get shipped off the streets of whatever city they were in. Usually for that particular location, they were coming from like San Francisco, California. And they would get shipped to this intentional community where things were provided for them. They would have a chance to get clean and kind of rebuild their life. And they would learn about their faith, and they would learn job skills, and the community was there to support them in their efforts of their new faith. So in 1978, when my brother and I were 2 years old, some of the people were leaving that intentional community and were moving to Phoenix, Arizona to start a church. And my parents, due to circumstances that I'm not exactly 100% sure of, decided to move to Arizona as well. They wanted to follow this particular pastor, this leader who was going to Arizona. So when I was 2, we moved to Arizona. So the idea of community, which I've talked about quite a bit throughout the course of this podcast, that came from that first 2 years of my life. And though I wasn't conscious of it, it was a part of my life, and it was a very big part of my parents' life, which contributes majorly to the story later on. So technically, I'm born in Oregon. I'm from Oregon. But then I moved to Arizona when I was 2, and we lived there until I was 15. And so that's where I grew up. It's my earliest memories are from the places that we lived in Arizona. That's where I started school. That's where I met really my first friends and built relationships with people, relationships that I still have a few of them to this day. My friend Lauren from the Refried Pea story, that's where I met his family because his family was one of the ones that moved from Oregon to Arizona as well to plant this church. And so I was born in Oregon. I grew up in Arizona. That's kind of where I define my growing up years because I was kind of came of age. It's where my foundations were laid in Arizona. It's where I really got my start. And so much of who I am, it started there. That's who the teams that I still root for as far as sports go. I root for the Phoenix Suns. I root for the Arizona Cardinals. I root for teams from that area. Well, I'm fiercely loyal. Even though I've lived other places for longer, I'm still a fan of those things. And so that's really where I feel like my roots are. At the age of 15, just after 15, so that Christmas of that year, my parents told us, hey, we're going to go visit Washington for Christmas. We'll go spend the time in the snow and we'll hang out and we'll have a good time. And we're going to check out this community. that we were thinking about possibly moving there. And so it was all this potential, like maybe we're going to do this, maybe we're not going to do this, but we're going to go check it out. And that's where community ties back into the story. My parents had been looking for community since they left Oregon in 1978, and this was now 1991 that we went up there to visit. So we drove up there in the snow, and like we had a good time. We're hanging out and we're playing in the snow, going skiing and sledding. But in my brother and I's mind, this place was kind of crazy. Like they had all these big, long church meetings, and we were hanging out in a basement, and there was all of this people talking about sin and interesting religious things and things that we just were not used to. All night meetings. Like we were there from just before Christmas until after New Year's. And so we went to the New Year's Eve service where all of a sudden there's all these really, like, they were kind of religious fanatics. That's the way that I looked at them. And they're all getting up there and they're confessing their sins. And they're talking about all of this crazy stuff. Like, we want this year to be the best year. And so they're getting up there and they're giving words and they're confessing their sin because they want to have a clear conscience going into the new year. My brother and I would just sit there and we would look back and forth at each other and be like, this is crazy. What are these people talking about? What is going on here? Mom and dad can't be serious about this. And then at one point, my parents had this meeting with like the leaders of this church in this community, and we weren't allowed to be there. Just my parents were there, and they were talking to them and asking them questions about what the place was about. And the leaders there were asking my parents, like, why do you want to be here? And all of this stuff. And they were kind of basically recruiting my parents. My dad was a doctor and they wanted a doctor in the community. And my mom was a school teacher and they thought that maybe a school teacher would be good. So they were doing some pretty heavy duty recruiting. And my parents are also asking some pretty specific questions too. And so we were there for like 2 weeks and we drove back and we all went back to school. This was our freshman year of high school. My brother and I were like on the football team. Later, we were on the track team. All of our friends were there. I was in the drama department. We were on the honor roll. We were about to be starting like driver's ed and getting our driver's license and all this stuff. And so we get back and like we're getting ready to, and we're heading into all that stuff again. And I don't remember the exact sequence of events, but at some point shortly after we got back, my parents informed us that we were, in fact, going to move to Washington. My brother and I, again, one of those knowing looks like, what in the actual heck is going on here? We just thought this was a scouting mission. We didn't think it was actually serious. Turns out, we found out later that my parents had pretty much decided that they were going to move there before we even visited, and they were just going up there to see if there was any red flags as to why they shouldn't. So we finished out the school year, and then in summer of 1992, June, I think it was, we packed up all of our stuff and we moved from Phoenix, Arizona to extreme northeast Washington. Phoenix at the time was 3.5 million people as far as the metro area. It got up to an average of 110 to 115 degrees in the summertime. Pavement everywhere. Like, this was a major metropolitan area. And we were moving into a little town of 3,500 people, 10 miles south of the Canadian border. This is about as rural as you can get. Again, my brother would just shake our heads like, what is going on? What is going on here? We didn't know anybody. We're missing out. Like, we're finishing our freshman year. We're giving up everything. We didn't really have a choice in the matter. And so we moved up there, and the first house we lived in was on the top of this mountain that our car wouldn't hardly make it up the road. We literally would have to get out of the car and walk up the hill so that the car was light enough to actually make it up the hill. Remember, there are 7 people in my family. And we had this little 2-door Hyundai Excel that wouldn't make it up the road unless there was only one person driving. So that's the first place we lived. And we only lived there for about 3 weeks. I'm not going to get into the whole litany of all the places that we lived, but next we moved to a reasonable place, and then we spent summer of 1993 sleeping. We were homeless. We were homeless because Dad wasn't making it as a doctor. We stayed with some friends that we had met for about a month, maybe 2 months. I broke my foot when I was there. I slept on the couch because I couldn't get up and around. And so I was stuck on this couch for weeks. That summer, after living with that family for a while, we went from 3.5 million people. This is a town of 3,500 people. Yes, 350 people. And that was not the town, that was the town and the surrounding area. So we then moved and we camped for the summer. Once again, weren't allowed to drive all the way back to our campsite. So we had to park our car and then walk back. And it rained. It was the rainiest summer in like 25 years or something for the area. My grandparents actually came to visit us during this time and they left. Like, my grandparents are just like, they never said anything to us about it, but you could just see on their faces, like, what is our son taking his family through? So they left to go back to Arizona. But before they drove all the way back, they stopped in the local town. This was a bigger town that was about 30 or 40 miles away. And they talked to a realtor and they bought a piece of property for my parents. It had a house on it. And a couple days after we left, after we thought they had gone back to Arizona, they drove back, found us, and said, hey, we can't stand the fact that our grandchildren are homeless. We bought you a piece of property with a house on it. And so they took us over to it. We looked at it. My parents were pretty excited. My brother and I are still just skeptical as hell of all of this. Like, what is going on here? So, long story short, my mom has lived on that property. We got that place in 1993. My mom still lives on that piece of property. And my brother, my older brother, still lives in that original house, which wasn't in great shape then. And 30 years later, it's still not in great shape. Over the years, we built another place on the property that was a barn. Then it was an apartment. Then it was a shop. And then we full-fledged, now it's where my mom lives. And still, like, to this day, she's lived on that piece of property for over 30 years. And she's been a part of that community for 32 years. Early 2000s, when I decided I wanted to be a chiropractor, I went to the local community college for a while. And then I ended up transferring to Eastern Washington University, which is about a 2.5-hour drive from that area. That area is where I get a lot of my politics. It taught me how to work hard. It's where I met a lot of friends. Like, I born in Oregon, grew up in Arizona, and then, like, this was kind of a lot of my formative years where I was really starting to understand things and look at the world from a place of actually being able to understand. I did like a 2-year discipleship Bible program. I learned a lot of history. I learned a lot of stuff about politics and religion and community. It really, like, formed a lot of, like, my foundation for who I am. But then in 2003, 2 years in community college in that area, and then I moved away to school to go to Eastern Washington University, which is where in Cheney, Washington, just outside of Spokane. And that's where I finished my last 2 years of undergrad. I met some great people there, had some good times. Then in 2005, I moved to Oregon. Oregon is a crazy place. It was not quite as crazy then as it is now, but still, it's a pretty crazy place. It was a pretty crazy place. And I went from 2005 to 2009. I lived in Oregon, in Portland, just outside Portland. And that's where I did my chiropractic school. That's where I met my wife. That's where I met some more really great people. I kind of learned about life outside of this community in Washington. The community in Washington was called Marble. So once I moved to Portland, I learned that there was more to life outside of this community. Because over the years of being a part of that community, I really started to adopt. At first, when I moved there, I couldn't stand the place, the country music and all that. But that's a story for another day. Over the years, I kind of adopted that place and it became a big part of me. But moving to Oregon and being a part of things that were there was very transformational to me. When I moved there, I intended to always go back to Marble and be a chiropractor. But then over the course of the years that I was there and meeting my ex-wife and all of that stuff, like, I learned that there was life outside of that place and that there was more to life that I wanted that I could find there. So from 2005 to 2008 or 2009, I lived in Portland, in and around. In 2009, I got a job in Spokane. Pretty cool how that happened, but that's again another story for another day. Then I got married and lived in Spokane. It's where I got my chiropractic license. That's where I had my first couple of jobs in chiropractic. I launched my first business. It's where all my kids were born. And so all those stories that I've told about my kids and stuff like that, that all happened in Spokane. Now, here I am. I'm a man. I have a wife. I have kids. I have a job. And I'm supposed to try to make my way in the world. And it's where things started falling apart because that foundation that I thought I had wasn't really as strong as I thought it was. So things fell apart. So the first couple of years in Spokane, I loved it. And then it was just one thing after another, falling apart, losing my kids, eventually getting divorced. It's where I started to really drink heavily and use drugs, marijuana, and all the stuff. I was homeless once again at one point when I lived in Spokane towards the end. It's where I first got into recovery. It's where I met, again, some interesting people along the way, some people that taught me some very valuable life lessons. And it's where I was working as a door-to-door vacuum cleaner salesman when I got a call about a job in Yakima. I knew I needed to get out. For emotional and very practical reasons, I couldn't stay in Spokane. I knew I needed to get out. I didn't know where I was going to go. And then I got the call, the quote unquote random call about a job in Yakima. And the guy drove up there and met me. He offered me the job and says, if you decide you want to move to Yakima, the job is yours. And so that's how I ended up in Yakima. And Yakima is where I got my feet back underneath me. Yakima is where I finally gave up all the drugs and all the alcohol for good. And it's been 7.5 years. It's where I discovered my passion for the gym and for fitness and for health and nutrition and all those things. It's where I really finally figured out what it means to be a man and what it means to be a Christian and to have friends who truly had my back at every turn. Friends who called me out on my BS. Friends that called me out when I made bad decisions, and friends that encouraged me when I made good ones. It's where I transformed my life from who I was to now being the dangerous gentleman. This happened through a series, and I've talked about on an episode, a series of random occurrences or something like that. I think that's the name of the episode. Of all the people that I met in what seems to be just random ways. And these people were foundational in me becoming who I was and who I am and who I will continue to be. It's where I fell in love with God again. It's where I figured out what that really means, what it means to be a follower of Christ, what it means to be an active person in the community, what it means to be a man, and what it means to be a doctor, and what it means to be just everything that I am now. And so it's a very difficult question when people ask me, where are you from? Again, born in Oregon, grew up in Arizona. My foundation was set in Washington the first time around. I moved away to Oregon, started to figure out that there was life outside of that life that I had, that there was more that God wanted and had more for me. Then I moved to Spokane. That's where my family started, and that's where my life fell apart. And then in Yakima is where I started to get it together. And I don't have it all together, but it's where I finally realized what at least a big part of my purpose is. And there's that movie called Slumdog Millionaire. That's the story about the kid who was on a game show and starts to get all these what seems to be random questions, but then it traces through his life about how he knows the answers to all these questions. And so he has his Slumdog Millionaire moment. I feel like right now where I am is a culmination of all the places I've lived and all the experiences that I've been through, and everything that's happened to me has gotten me to where I am and prepared me for where I am now. And one final piece is that both my grandmothers are from Norway. And so I really relate to my Viking heritage too. So ultimately, if you want to trace things back, that's kind of where I'm from. But the point is being able to look back over the course of your life and all of the things that have happened to you and all the places that you've lived and all the friends and the relationships that you've had have led you to the moment that you are in now. So when someone asks you where you're from, there's the easy answer that you can give, quick answer. And I can give a quick answer. But the truth is, and the reality is that you are from every place that you've been. And every place that you've been has added and contributed to who you are. So find a way to be thankful for all those things, thankful for all those experiences, and to be able to maximize what those experiences have taught you. And don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because you had a bad experience someplace doesn't mean that you should get rid of it. Find the silver lining if and when you can. And if you look hard enough, you can. That's where you're from. So I am from Oregon. I am from Arizona. I am from Northeast Washington. I am from Spokane. And I am from Yakima. And I am from Norway. But most importantly, I am from the heart and mind of God, because He's the one that walked me through each one of these places that I've lived. My life existed in His mind before I got to any of these places. So that's ultimately where I'm from. I hope you enjoyed this and got something out of it. We'll talk at you next time. So if you like this content, please give it a rating, a review, and share it with your friends. Also, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about me and what I'm all about and what I can maybe do for you, check out my website at thedangerousgentleman.org. That's thedangerousgentleman.org. Thank you for listening.